My name is Rachel, 29 years old, and I will never forget the night my dignity was ripped apart in front of 24 wealthy people. At a lavish family dinner in my boyfriend Ethan's house, his father, Harold Carter, the powerful construction tycoon, raised his voice so everyone could hear and sneered at me, street garbage in a rented dress. My face burned when laughter rippled across the table, and in that moment, I made a decision that would change Harold's life forever. Before I reveal the shocking truth, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. I met Ethan under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little ghostly at a graveyard shift. I worked the register at the Quick Mart by the interstate, a place that smelled like cheap gasoline and rain-soaked tires. Between rushes, I kept a sketchbook under the counter, smudging graphite into cheekbones and city skylines, practicing hands and eyes and the stubborn curves of mouths. Nights were for saving tips and stealing time for my portfolio, for teaching myself to draw the life I couldn't yet afford to live. At 2 a.m., the regulars came in waves, truckers with calloused palms and gentle laughs, cops on third cups, high school kids pretending to be older, and a woman who bought scratch-offs and never scratched them until morning. After a while, faces blur. But Ethan stood out the night he walked in sideways through a sheet of rain, shaking droplets from his hair, grinning like he had been familiar with me for a long time. "Is the coffee strong or just emotionally available?" he asked, leaning on the counter that dares you not to smile back. "Both," I replied, because I'd survived enough shifts to fight sarcasm with sarcasm. $2.50 if you want to risk it," I stated. He looked down at the little tip jar, read the marker scrawl that said art school donation box, dreams are so expensive, and raised his eyebrows. "You an artist or an honest thief?" "Mostly I draw," I said, but my voice betrayed me and turned soft on the first word. I slid the sketchbook out with the sheepishness of someone caught singing to herself. Ethan turned pages with careful hands, the way you touch a sleeping cat. "Wow, these look like a real scenes." And then he dropped a 5 into the tip jar for a coffee that cost $2.50. He smiled to me and left with the paper cup steaming in his palms. That became a tradition. The bell over the door, a gust of air, his jokes like small fireworks in the quietest hour. Some nights he bought windshield wipers and asked me which ones were compatible with cars that have seen things. Once he came in just to ask whether I preferred 2B or 4B pencils, and then returned 5 minutes later with a small pack of both, setting them on the counter without commentary. He remembered the weirdest details. The chip flavors I liked. The way I tucked hair behind my ear when I was drawing ears. He pointed out the tiny nick on my thumbnail from an X-Acto knife and told me it looked like a crescent moon. One Thursday, a summer storm tried to peel the parking lot from the earth. The power hiccuped. The pumps clicked off. I was alone behind the counter, drawing a pair of hands holding a bus ticket, when Ethan pressed his palms to the glass door and made a face like an actor in a disaster movie. "Permission to dock," he said, dripping on the mat. "I brought you contraband." He pulled a small, crumpled comic book from his jacket, something vintage and ridiculous, and slid it across the counter. "For your studies," Ethan added. "In case the curriculum covers dramatic shading and improbable cape physics." I laughed then, without the usual swallow. I didn't know what to do with his words, so I put it away and continued ringing up his purchases. He tipped $5. The next time, $10. Sometimes he pretended to struggle with the math, as if generosity were a charming miscalculation. "Oops," he'd say, dropping bills. After a month of this, our first date was nothing like the ones I had imagined in daydreams. There was no candlelit restaurant, no waiter presenting dishes with French names I couldn't pronounce. Instead, Ethan invited me to the roof of his old college dormitory. I almost said no at first. It sounded odd. Who goes on a date on the roof of a building? But his voice had a warmth to it when he called. "Trust me, Rachel. I promise it'll be worth it." So I went. When I climbed the last metal ladder and pushed open the roof door, I froze. The city sprawled beneath me, endless in its lights, the traffic below humming like a restless orchestra. And there, in the middle of the concrete rooftop, was a blanket. a pizza box balanced on it like a crown jewel, 2 cans of soda waiting, and an old, bulky projector propped against a stack of textbooks. Ethan looked up at me with that boyish grin I was already starting to recognize. Restaurant ambience, 0 stars. Skyline view, 5 stars, he said. Something inside me unclenching. I had shown up in my only nice jacket, half expecting I'd embarrass myself in some expensive restaurant. But here, with the wind tugging my hair and the smell of cheese drifting out of the pizza box, I felt oddly at ease. We sat cross-legged on the blanket, our knees almost touching, as he handed me a greasy slice. "Don't tell me you're one of those people who eat pizza with a fork and knife," he teased. That night, he wasn't trying to dazzle me with money he didn't have. At least, that's what I thought, or stories to make himself seem larger than life. He told me about the books that kept him awake at night, the essays he returned to like old friends. Ethan told me about design, about how a room could change the way a person felt about themselves, how color and light could give dignity to spaces people had long stopped noticing. There was no arrogance in the way he said it, no hunger to impress. He spoke like someone sharing a secret dream he hadn't told many others. For the first time in a very long while, I felt like someone was actually listening to me. Not waiting for their turn to talk, not humoring me until the subject changed, but listening. When I confessed that I wanted to be more than the cashier behind a counter, his eyes didn't cloud with doubt the way most people's did. The projector flickered to life then, its bulb buzzing faintly. Against the wall of the rooftop access, an old black and white film danced to life. The picture wasn't sharp, the sound was tinny, but I had never felt so enchanted. Wrapped in a borrowed blanket, the scent of pizza clinging to the night. 7 months passed like a slow unfolding of a dream. By then, Ethan had become part of my everyday life. He was the first person I wanted to tell when I sold a sketch to a small magazine, the one who made even gas station coffee taste like a celebration. I thought I knew what happiness felt like, but I had no idea how fragile and trembling it would become when placed against the glare of wealth. It began one evening as we sat on his worn couch, my head against his shoulder, when he said it casually, as if asking me to join him for a walk. "Rachel, my father's company is hosting its anniversary banquet. I want you to come with me." I stiffened before I could stop myself. The words hung heavy in the air. Ethan's father. I had never met him, but I knew of him, Harold Carter, owner of Carter Construction, a man whose name carried weight in the city, appearing often in headlines about skyscrapers and million-dollar projects. He belonged to the world of tailored suits, private clubs, handshakes that decided city contracts. Ethan must have felt my hesitation because he cupped my face gently. "My family needs to see how wonderful you are," he said. Ethan spoke with such conviction, such certainty, that I almost believed his faith would be enough to shield me. The following days, however, my nerves gnawed at me relentlessly. I didn't own anything close to what could pass as banquet appropriate. My wardrobe was a rotation of jeans, plain sweaters, and the one jacket I had tried so hard to make look expensive by adding a thrift store brooch. For a banquet filled with the city's elite, I was hopelessly out of my depth. It was my friend Clara who came to the rescue. When I confessed my panic, she disappeared into her closet and returned holding a long evening gown wrapped in tissue paper. It was deep navy, satin that shimmered faintly under the light, with a neckline that managed to be elegant without being scandalous. "This," she said firmly, "is your lucky dress. Take it. And don't you dare argue." I touched the fabric like it was spun from another world. I could hardly imagine myself in it, but I thanked her with a lump in my throat. When my sister saw me trying it on later, she stood in the doorway of our shared bedroom, arms crossed, her smile softer than usual. "You look like you belong at any table," she said. Then, after a pause, she added, "No, you deserve to sit at any table." Her words settled deep into me. Deserve? It was a word I rarely allowed myself. But that night, standing in front of the mirror with satin draped over my shoulders, I dared to imagine it could be true. The evening of the banquet arrived with all the weight of an exam I had not studied for. Ethan arrived to pick me up in his car, wearing a suit that fit him so perfectly it made me forget, for a moment, how much I dreaded the evening. He looked at me as though the rest of the world had fallen away, his eyes shining with pride. "You're stunning," he whispered, and just like that, I felt both terrified and invincible. The drive to the venue was a journey into another universe. As we approached the beautiful house where the banquet was held, sleek luxury cars lined the entrance, their polished surfaces reflecting the glow of chandeliers spilling out from tall glass doors. Valets in crisp uniforms dashed back and forth, opening doors for women draped in glittering gowns, men whose watches alone probably cost more than my yearly rent. I pressed my hands together in my lap to keep them from trembling. My gown felt like borrowed courage, and I couldn't shake the fear that at any moment someone would look at me and know I didn't belong. Ethan reached over and laced his fingers through mine. "Remember what I told you," he whispered. I nodded, though my stomach churned. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, gilded mirrors reflected endless movement, and waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne that glittered like liquid gold. The hum of conversations filled the room, punctuated by bursts of laughter that seemed rehearsed. I caught glimpses of jewels at throats and wrists, the shine of silk and velvet, the unmistakable aura of people who had never worried about making rent. I followed Ethan closely, clutching his arm like a lifeline. But my inner voice whispered, "What if they can tell? What if they see through you?" Ethan's certainty carried me, though. He introduced me with quiet pride, his hand always at the small of my back, as though anchoring me in place. As the evening unfolded, I realized this was more than just a company anniversary. It was a display, a show of power and wealth orchestrated by Harold Carter himself. He was everywhere, shaking hands, clapping backs, his laughter booming above the hum of the crowd. His presence seemed to command gravity itself, drawing others into orbit. I had yet to be introduced to him, and the thought sent my pulse racing. But Ethan kept me close, his voice in my ear, telling me stories about his coworkers and childhood, distracting me from the mounting fear. Still, the unease grew with every clink of a glass, every glance that lingered a little too long. The closer we moved toward Ethan's family, the more my pulse thundered in my ears. The first to greet us was Linda, Ethan's mother. She was tall, composed, the kind of woman whose presence felt like porcelain, flawless, gleaming, but fragile if pressed too hard. Her dress shimmered under the chandeliers, and her hair was so immaculately pinned it looked sculpted rather than styled. When Ethan leaned in to introduce me, she offered her hand. Her grip was cool, her smile deliberate, her words precise. "Rachel, we've heard about you." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes sliding over me as if memorizing details for later inspection. "Thank you for having me," I managed. My voice sounded smaller than I had hoped, yet I forced it to hold steady. Linda nodded, lips pressed into something that resembled a smile, but felt more like an assessment. "Ethan speaks highly of you," she added. Then, almost too quickly, her gaze shifted to another guest across the room. The conversation ended before it could begin. If Linda was porcelain, Samantha, Ethan's younger sister, was fire. Her heels clicking against the polished floor, her hair bouncing with a glossy shine. Where her mother's politeness felt cold, Samantha's smile was all sparkle and charm. "Oh, you must be Rachel," she exclaimed, grabbing my hand before I could prepare myself. Without hesitation, she looped her arm through mine. "Come on, you can't just stand here in the corner. Everyone's dying to meet Ethan's mysterious girlfriend." I shot Ethan a nervous glance, but he only gave me an encouraging nod. And then I was swept away. Samantha paraded me from circle to circle like I was a new accessory she wanted to show off. "This is Rachel," she announced to clusters of guests, polished men and women. Their eyes flickered over me with interest, some curious, some indifferent, a few downright skeptical. Yet Samantha's energy was relentless. She asked me questions loudly enough for others to hear. "Where did you two meet? What do you do? What's your passion?" I answered as best I could, feeling every word land with uncertain weight in the air around me. It was overwhelming, but not all encounters were sharp-edged. After a while, Samantha pulled me toward a pair of elderly figures seated at a table near the center. Their presence was quieter than the glittering crowd around them. "Grandma, Grandpa, "This is Rachel," Samantha declared, almost dramatically, as though presenting me on stage. They both looked up with soft eyes that immediately undid some of the tension knotted in my chest. His grandparents, Harold's parents, the founders of the company whose name towered over the city, did not look like emperors of wealth. The grandfather wore a suit that was elegant but clearly old, with sleeves a little too short. His grandmother had silver hair pinned back simply, and a smile that felt warmer than any I had seen all evening. "Well now," the old man said, his voice a mix of gravel and melody, "so this is the girl Ethan's been hiding from us." Heat rushed to my cheeks, but his smile was genuine, teasing without malice. His wife leaned closer, taking my hand with fingers soft from age. "We've heard you're an artist. Is that true?" I blinked. "Yes. I'm working on a portfolio." Her eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. Creativity is such a gift. Harold used to sketch houses on napkins when he was younger." "Did you know that?" she said, nudging her husband with fondness. He chuckled. "Ugly houses, though. Good thing I stuck to pouring concrete instead." They laughed together, and I found myself smiling too, some of the tension melting away. Unlike Linda's sharp politeness or Samantha's whirlwind charm, the grandparents radiated something else entirely. I lingered at their table longer than I expected, answering their gentle questions, soaking in their unexpected warmth. They told me stories of when they had started the company long before skyscrapers, when they were just a young couple trying to make ends meet, pouring everything they had into a small construction business. "We weren't rich back then," the grandmother said softly. "We worked alongside the crews, ate sandwiches on site, counted coins for payroll." There was no boasting in her voice, only memory. It struck me then how far removed the current banquet, with its chandeliers and champagne, felt from the humble beginnings she described. And perhaps that was why they welcomed me so easily. They still remembered what it meant to build something from nothing. The dinner was arranged like a performance, and I quickly realized I was not just a guest, but part of the spectacle. The banquet table stretched long and gleaming, covered in white linen. Dozens of crystal glasses caught the chandelier light, forks and knives aligned with military precision. A low hum of polite conversation rose from the guests, blending with the sound of violins in the corner. The weight of it all pressed down on me, heavier than the gown I wore. I sat between Ethan and Samantha, with Linda across from me and Harold, the patriarch himself, presiding like a king from the head of the table. For most of the evening, I tried to fade into the rhythm of small talk, nodding at stories I didn't fully understand, forcing smiles whenever someone glanced my way. I wanted to be invisible, but Harold Carter had other plans. He waited until the waiters placed the main course before us, a roast prepared so artfully I was almost afraid to touch it, before turning his attention to me. His voice was steady but sharp, cutting through the chatter and silencing those nearby. "So, Rachel," he started, his eyes glinting with something more than curiosity, "who is your father?" The clink of silverware against porcelain slowed. I felt the air shift as faces turned subtly toward me, waiting for my answer. My breath caught. It wasn't a question, it was a probe, a spotlight turned on the part of my life I usually kept tucked away. "He passed away when I was little," I managed, my voice quieter than I intended. "And what did he do?" Harold pressed. "What did he leave you?" I opened my mouth, but shame filled the space before words could. What did my father leave me? Nothing a Carter would recognize as worth mentioning. No inheritance, no company, no connections. Just a childhood that taught me how to survive with little. Finally, I whispered, "He worked construction jobs." "But we didn't, so nothing," Harold interrupted with a cold chuckle. "Not exactly the foundation this family is built on." A ripple of awkward laughter moved across the table, some guests lowering their eyes, others smirking into their napkins. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to hold my posture, even as my hands trembled beneath the tablecloth. But Harold wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice louder now, as though the entire table deserved to hear my examination. "Tell me, Rachel, why do you work at a gas station?" The question felt like a slap. My throat tightened. I could feel Ethan stiffen beside me, his hand brushing against mine as if to offer silent support. But his father's eyes pinned me down, waiting. Because it gives me time, I stammered. Time to work on my art. Art? Harold repeated, his lips curling in disdain. Then he threw back his head and laughed. The sound was deep, commanding, and it rolled over the table until others joined in, unsure if they were laughing at the joke or to stay in his good graces. So Art, he said again. That's what people say when they can't hold a real job. When they want to play pretend while the rest of us build the world. I felt my skin flush hot. I wanted to sink beneath the table, to vanish into the carpet. Then he tilted his head, narrowing his gaze as though lining up another strike. Okay, Rachel. Have you ever been abroad? I shook my head, too humiliated now to elaborate. Of course not, Harold said, waving his hand as if dismissing a predictable answer. You see, this is what happens when my son ignores the circles we raised him in and goes searching in gas stations for companionship. A girl who's never even left the country, never walked the streets of Rome or dined in Paris. And yet here she is at this table. The tone of his voice made it clear. This was not just mockery, it was judgment, a public declaration of my unworthiness. Around me, I sensed the smirks, the whispers, the careful glances from guests who had never worked a day in a uniform. I tried to steady myself, lifting the wine glass to my lips, hoping the liquid would calm the storm rising in my chest. But my fingers, trembling with shame, betrayed me. The glass tipped. Red wine cascaded across the pristine tablecloth, pooling quickly, staining the flawless white with the violence of its color. Gasps echoed. I scrambled with my napkin, blotting uselessly, my breath quick and panicked. Harold's voice struck like a whip. Careful, girl, he bellowed, his words slicing the air. That bottle costs more than your monthly salary. Laughter erupted again, this time louder, sharper, filled with the glee of people who had been waiting for a spectacle. Their amusement felt like knives against my skin. My face burned. My hands froze, napkin clutched tightly, my shame magnified 100 times beneath the glittering chandeliers. And then Harold delivered the blow that silenced even the laughter. He leaned forward, his face illuminated cruelly by the light above, and declared, "You're just street garbage. Good for nothing. How did my son even notice you?" The words fell undeniable, echoing in my ears. Street garbage. That was what I was now, not Rachel, not an artist, not a woman trying to hold her place at this table, but trash dressed in borrowed satin. The room seemed to close in on me. Every pair of eyes was on me, some pitying, some delighted, most simply curious, like spectators at a theater performance waiting for the final act. My chest rose and fell rapidly, my fingers knotted in the napkin, my throat tight with the taste of humiliation. I could feel Ethan's hand near mine, but he didn't speak. Perhaps he was too stunned, perhaps too bound by the unshakable dominance of his father. In that silence, I felt completely alone. Shame swept over me like a tide, hot and suffocating. For a moment, I thought I might cry right there at the table. But beneath that tidal wave, something else stirred. I held my breath, clutching the spark to myself, letting the humiliation burn into something sharper. I placed my napkin beside my plate, pushed my chair back, and rose. The scrape of wood on marble startled a few guests. I didn't rush. I studied my breath and felt my spine align, each vertebra a decision. I saw Ethan's face first, hurt, protective, uncertain, then Linda, perfect and unreadable, then Samantha, bright eyes darting, calculating, and beyond them the grandparents, still and attentive, as if they recognized the exact weather of this moment. At the far end, Harold's smile waited for me like a closed door. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," I said, and even my voice surprised me. It did not tremble. "You just helped me finally decide on an issue I was unsure about." The room held still. Somewhere, a waiter froze mid-pour. Then I made a confession. I am not only an artist, but also a freelance journalist. Harold didn't blink. He had built buildings that pierced cloud lines. He had probably weathered depositions and headlines. He expected noise, not precision. But I gave him precision. For 2 years, I have been living a double life that no one at this table, except Ethan in fragments, would have guessed. The gas station wasn't a failure, it was a vantage point. That fluorescent island gave me odd hours, anonymity, and a counter where men in reflective vests and dust-caked boots told the truth more freely than they ever told it under fluorescent HR lights. I learned which inspectors liked their coffee black and their envelopes thick, which foremen bought wrist braces more often than harnesses, which young laborers limped quietly for fear of being replaced by men who didn't. While I rang up windshield fluid and gum, I kept a small notebook in my apron. Numbers, names, dates, addresses. I learned the smell of concrete dust and the synonyms people use when they don't want to say the word bribe. I filed public records requests on lunch breaks, learned the obstinate poetry of municipal file rooms, the way boxes whisper when lids are lifted after too many years. I visited sites at odd dawns and dead midnights, counting floors, taking photographs from sidewalks, tracing the invisible geometry between what was permitted on paper and what rose in steel. I learned the slow patience of corroboration, how every allegation must be braided to 3 others before it can stand on its own. None of this fit the caricature he had drawn of me, the girl in the rented dress, the cashier with a dream she should have outgrown. That caricature had been a very useful mask. People often tell masks the truth because they think the person underneath can't hurt them. All the threads led to your company, I stated, and I let the sentence rest. It didn't need adornment. Not a single thread, not a wayward rumor, not one angry ex-employee trying to turn a grievance into a storm. I did not list the names that had confided in me, the managers who wondered aloud why safety audits always seemed to arrive the day after violations disappeared. The subcontractors who described bid numbers whispered in parking lots before the bids were ever posted. The clerks who processed invoices for materials never delivered. The inspectors who used the company gym and somehow forgot to use their jurisdiction. I did not tell the room how many times I had walked past a site fence and felt the wrongness rising from it like heat, how blueprints in one department didn't match reality 3 neighborhoods away. I did not say the word kickback. I did not need to. His face told me which words I had already spoken without speaking. I told them instead about time. 2 winters of breath smoking outside chain link while I photographed deliveries that arrived when city databases claimed the site was idle. 2 summers of conversations in pickup cabs with men who spoke softly because they wanted to keep feeding their children, but also wanted to stop counting stretchers. 2 autumns of spreadsheets that looked like constellations until the lines connected and became a map, and the name at the top of the map kept glowing, Carter. I had protected my sources with encryption and pseudonyms, kept drafts on drives no one could reach, saved duplicates in places no flood could touch. I had made myself small while doing something very large, because I knew what a big city can do to a person. Why then the delay? Why hadn't I already rolled this into daylight if the threads made such a net? The answer was personal. Ethan. Love is not an alibi, but it is a force. I had questioned whether the smugness of exposing a dynasty justified the wreckage a son would have to live in. I had asked myself at 3 a.m. whether justice, without mercy, is merely a new kind of harm. I had set deadlines and pushed them, not because the evidence was thin, but because my heart was. All of that ended when he called me a street garbage. The insult itself, cheap, unimaginative, was not what decided me. It was the truth hiding inside it, his contempt for anyone without armor made of money. His certainty that dignity is a luxury item. I felt no triumph as I stood there. I felt relief. I thought of the notebook pages crease-thin from rereading, the interviews recorded in my bathroom with the shower running to drown our voices, the nights I came home smelling like asphalt and printer toner and fear. I thought of my mother's hands, tired from years that never paid interest. I could feel Harold's stare harden, attempting to turn me into a spectacle again, to drag me back to the role he had assigned me. But I did not threaten. I did not wave papers or invoke lawyers or promise headlines. I turned, briefly, to Ethan and let him see what my decision cost and what it saved. I did not apologize. Love that demands silence in the face of harm is not love, it is ransom. And I won't live by ransom. I looked back to Harold and added only this. I had balanced what I owed to the truth against what I owed to the man I loved. But after your words about me, I have no doubts left. I sat down, hands steady, heart steady, and felt the room inhale. Linda's eyes were glass. Samantha's brightness flickered. The grandparents watched me the way builders watch wind before a pour, measuring, respecting, unsurprised. The wine stain on the cloth reddened like a seal. Somewhere, a glass clinked against a plate and was set carefully down. I folded my napkin once, twice, as if I could crease this moment into a smaller shape and keep it in my pocket. But I knew what the next step would be. Harold's words still hung in the chandelier light when I reached for my phone. The screen glowed against the red stain I'd left there minutes before. I had typed the message earlier in the restroom, then hovered over it in doubt. But now I pressed send and tucked the phone beside my plate. The violins had already faltered. The table was listening. I looked at Harold and felt nothing that resembled fear. I just sent a message to my editor about the publication of the official materials, I said, each word clear enough to carry. The small sounds of a banquet, the whisper of napkins, ice shifting in glasses, stopped like a breath caught in someone's throat. Of course, I did not explain everything. I had done that already in my files. The timeline's coherent. Legal had reviewed. Names had been redacted where the law required and left where the law demanded. The embargo now had a clock, and the city would wake to it. What I had gathered was simple to state and terrible to contemplate. Illegal construction disguised as variance, bribery of inspectors in envelopes that smelled like cologne and cigar boxes, falsification of documents through copy, paste rituals that left tiny, repeatable scars in the metadata. A building that lost 2 floors between a permit and a ribbon cutting. A safety audit stamped approved 3 days before the scaffold collapse it purported to prevent. Subcontractor invoices for shipments that never arrived, signed by people who never visited the site. Harold tried to laugh. It came out as a cough. He leaned back as if distance could shrink the words, then forward as if force could break them. I watched him search for a tone, mockery, indignation, contempt, and find none that could silence the fact that the message had already gone. I didn't tempt the room into debate. I turned slightly so that the table, not just Harold, could hear me. As the street garbage you named, I said, I am officially canceling your company. No one applauded. The only reply was the tiny buzz of my phone against the linen. My editor's response had arrived with ruthless efficiency. Received. Running first light. Front page. The digital version will go live at 6 a.m. with the full packet linked. We verified your last addendum. Thank you for your courage. I set the phone down again. I felt my heartbeat answer it like a measured drum. That night became a long corridor I walked with my eyes open. I left the banquet without saying goodbye, the cool night air cutting the perfume, sweet hall from my skin. In the cab, the city looked newly legible, the cranes, the tarps, the plywood walls that promise futures, every surface a page I had already read. I watched the clock and the sky and the slender line where they meet. At 6:02 a.m., the push alerts hit. My phone lit up like a siren. Headline: Citywide investigation, illegal builds and bribed inspections at Carter Construction. The article opened with the photographs I had taken at dawn so early the streets still yawned, with scans of permits that contradicted steel, with audio files whose timestamps matched the ersatz approvals. There were quotes from site medics describing injuries that never became reports, from clerks who processed invoices with product codes that didn't exist, from neighbors who had complained into pits that swallowed their letters. There was a quiet, devastating paragraph about a widow whose husband fell from a scaffold that was technically up to code, until the code turned out to be a signature traded for a lifetime gym membership. I made tea I did not drink. The comments ran like a river. Then the river became a flood. The city posted a statement promising cooperation with state authorities. The state posted a statement announcing inquiries. The union locals posted statements that sounded like a throat clearing before a march. A councilwoman who had once cut a ribbon beside Harold posted a photograph of that day and a new caption that did not include his name. By 9:12 a.m., the markets had opened and the ticker began to tell its blunt story. Carter Construction's parent stock slid at the bell, then dropped, then fell again when the business desks follow. Up piece listed the lenders with the largest exposure. Trading paused twice on volatility. When it resumed, the chart looked like a staircase someone had kicked loose. The news crawler crawled and never caught up. Analysts who had praised the company's operational excellence the day before discovered the vocabulary for risk. A rating agency issued a watch. The main lender pulled a credit line pending clarification. I refreshed the article and found an editor's note added in bold. This investigation will continue as additional records are reviewed. A second note, the paper has alerted authorities to evidence of potential crimes. The word potential is the law's favorite umbrella. It keeps the rain off while the sky decides. Still, the sidewalks had already shifted. People were reading. And people were deciding. The empire had entered weather. I pictured Harold staring at a screen in some sealed office, calculating how much of this storm could be bought, how much silenced, how much delayed by muscle and money. I pictured the grandparents, sitting side by side with the paper open, the morning sun slanting across their hands, neither triumphant nor shocked, just achingly sad to see their name bent by a son who loved power more than the work that once justified it. My phone vibrated again, but I already knew what it would say in the aggregate: statements, denials, selective truths, or a promise to conduct an internal review. Internal reviews are what companies do when they need to borrow time. I went in my window and watched men on a nearby site move like notes on a staff. They clipped into harnesses, checked one another's buckles, shouted signals that carried more care than all the banquet's compliments. The city went on, cranes turning slowly like second hands. Somewhere, a foreman turned down a radio and told his crew to take 10. When the newspaper hit the stands the next morning, it was as if the entire city held its breath. The name Carter, once synonymous with gleaming skyscrapers, now sat side by side with words like bribery, fraud, and illegal contracts. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, government inspectors raided offices, and TV channels repeated the story every hour. The first consequence was swift. Harold was placed under investigation. The smug arrogance with which he had humiliated me just the night before turned into silence, then into visible panic. Lawyers rushed in and out of his house. His phone rang endlessly, but he rarely answered. The same powerful men who had clinked glasses with him at the banquet table began to distance themselves, their polite smiles dissolving into sharp statements to the press that they had no knowledge of Carter Construction's internal dealings. For me, the aftermath was a mixture of fear and relief. I had hesitated only because of Ethan. I loved him, and I feared that my truth would destroy the man who had shown me kindness when I thought I was invisible. Ethan's reaction, at first, was the hardest part. He looked at me with wounded eyes, not because I had exposed his father, but because I had hidden the truth from him. He told me he felt betrayed, as though I had been living a double life right under his nose. I understood his pain, even as I tried to explain. How could I tell him before, when I wasn't sure myself whether I had the strength to carry through with it? He walked out that night, slamming the door behind him, and I feared that everything, my love, my career, even my safety, had just been lost in one brutal strike. But life has a strange way of revealing who truly stands beside you. Days later, when the investigation deepened, Ethan began to dig into his father's documents himself. He didn't want to believe me, I know that. He wanted desperately to find proof that his father was innocent, that I had exaggerated or misunderstood. But the deeper he looked, the more undeniable the evidence became. He found accounts that didn't match, letters exchanged with officials, bribes hidden under consulting fees. And when he saw those things with his own eyes, something inside him broke. He came back to me, pale and shaken, and admitted, "You were right. I didn't want it to be true, but it is." Ethan made a choice I never expected him to make. He severed ties with his family. He walked away from the mansions, the influence, the Carter name that once opened every door. It was not an easy decision. I saw the torment in his eyes. But he said something I will never forget. If the foundation is rotten, you don't keep building on it. You tear it down and start again. And that's what he did. He used what he knew about design, architecture, and management to start something entirely new, a foundation dedicated to supporting honest construction. It wasn't about massive skyscrapers or glossy magazine spreads. It was about helping small, ethical builders compete against giants, about showing that integrity could still stand in an industry built on shortcuts and lies. Watching him rebuild himself, brick by brick, was one of the most powerful things I have ever witnessed. As for me, the storm catapulted my life into a direction I had only dared to dream of. The investigation brought attention not only to Harold's crimes, but also to my work as a journalist. Editors who had once ignored my emails suddenly called me, offering opportunities. One publishing house, one I had secretly admired for years, invited me to join their investigative team. Walking into their office for the first time, signing my contract, and seeing my name in print beneath stories that mattered, felt like stepping into a new skin. I was no longer the girl behind the gas station counter, sketching quietly in a notebook no one saw. Ethan and I stayed together, though it was not simple. Our love had been tested in the cruelest of ways. For a while, there were nights when he woke up restless, unable to forget the image of handcuffs on the man who had raised him. But slowly, we learned to rebuild, not on silence or secrets, but on honesty and sincerity. We spoke openly, even when it hurt. We admitted our fears, our insecurities, our regrets. And in that vulnerability, we grew closer. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how differently life might have unfolded if I had stayed silent that night. If I had let Harold's insults pass, bowed my head, and swallowed the humiliation like so many before me. Maybe Carter Construction would still be standing tall, its towers glistening against the skyline while its foundations rotted. Maybe Ethan would still live under the illusion that his family name was spotless. Maybe I would still be the quiet cashier with ink-stained fingers, sketching dreams I was too afraid to chase. It amazes me how sometimes it doesn't take years or even months to shift the fate of families. Sometimes one dinner, one evening, one moment of cruelty can turn into the very spark that reshapes destinies. I know many of you listening to this have been underestimated. Perhaps you've been called names, dismissed, looked down upon because of where you work, what you wear, or where you come from. I know that burn in your chest, that ache of being treated as less than human. So, just remember this. True strength lies not in how much money you have, not in the titles or the clothes or the power others try to wave in your face. True strength lies in your ability to defend your dignity, even when it feels like the world is watching and laughing. Also, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been humiliated the way I was? Did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your own story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who needs help now. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more true family drama stories, and hit that like button if you believe that truth is the greatest tool against arrogance. Because maybe your story will be the next one to prove that no insult and no billionaire's name can ever erase your worth.